The zipper on Stephanie's insulated chemotherapy bag was still open when a blue velvet jewelry box slid out and landed at my work boots. I had just come through the door of our Queen's apartment carrying groceries in one hand and a paper sack of her favorite bagels in the other, and for 3 or 4 seconds, I simply stared at that box on the floor. Stephanie was supposed to be at Memorial Sloan Kettering for an infusion. The gray bag was the one she always took with her, packed with electrolyte water, crackers, a blanket, anti-nausea medication, and the little lemon candies she claimed were the only thing that took away the metallic taste after treatment. I bent down and opened the box. Inside was a diamond tennis bracelet with a price tag folded beneath the cushion. $8,400. I remember that number because I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the digits to rearrange themselves into something less insane. Tucked behind the receipt was a handwritten card that said, "For Steph." The Hamptons were unforgettable. Next time, no excuses. D. My wife had stage 3 ovarian cancer. At least, that was what I believed. For nearly 11 months, I had been waking up before 4:30 every morning, driving to construction sites across New York, and volunteering for every weekend shift I could get because the woman I loved had told me she was fighting for her life. I was 35, a construction foreman overseeing a commercial renovation near Hudson Yards, and my hands had become so permanently rough that the skin split whenever the weather turned cold. Stephanie was 30, and before she got sick, she had worked as an event coordinator for a hospitality company in Manhattan. We had been married for 6 years. She claimed the treatments made it impossible for her to keep working, so I carried everything, our rent, insurance, food, transportation, and the medical expenses she said were not covered. I picked up the bracelet, returned it to the box, and placed everything exactly as I had found it. Then I noticed something else. The medication organizer inside the bag was full. Every compartment. Monday through Sunday, morning and evening, all untouched. That should not have been possible. Stephanie had supposedly taken her morning pills in front of me. She had stood at the kitchen counter wearing one of my old sweatshirts, swallowed something with orange juice, then smiled weakly and said, "Go build your skyscraper, babe. I'll be okay." I moved farther into the apartment. Her wool coat was missing, but the navy scarf she wore to every appointment was hanging beside the door. Her treatment folder was on the kitchen table. When I picked it up, a billing statement slipped onto the floor. It looked official at first glance, hospital logo, patient number, service descriptions, but something about it bothered me. The paper was too thin, and the address line listed York Avenue. Avenue was misspelled. I stood there holding that page while the refrigerator hummed behind me, and I felt the first clean fracture open inside my understanding of my own life. Now, I want you to sit with that moment for a second. Imagine believing your wife might die. Imagine measuring every decision against that fear, every dollar, every hour, every plan you postponed because there might not be a next year, and then finding one misspelled word that makes you wonder whether the entire tragedy was manufactured. My phone vibrated. Stephanie had texted, "Infusion is rough today. Might be here late. Love you." Underneath it was a photograph of her wrist with an 4-line taped to it. I enlarged the image. The background was carefully blurred, but the 4 tubing ended outside the frame, and the tape looked strangely clean. No hospital bracelet. No visible cannula beneath the gauze. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I typed, "Love you too. Take your time." I'm still at work, even though I was standing in our kitchen 6 feet from the bag she was supposed to have with her. I wish I could tell you I immediately knew the truth. I didn't. My mind fought for Stephanie harder than Stephanie had ever fought for me. Maybe the bracelet belonged to somebody else. Maybe the card was an inside joke. Maybe she had 2 treatment bags. Maybe the document was printed by a careless billing contractor. Grief makes you irrational, but hope can make you even more irrational because hope will accept almost any explanation that lets you keep the person you thought you knew. I put away the groceries, left the apartment, and drove my truck back toward Manhattan. At 5:40, I parked across from the hospital entrance. It was February, already dark, and dirty snow had hardened along the curb into ridges the color of concrete dust. I watched patients and families move through the revolving doors. Some people walked slowly. Some were pushed in wheelchairs. Some had that exhausted, inward expression I had seen on Stephanie's face hundreds of times. 6 o'clock passed. Then 6:30. At 6:48, she texted, "Doctor wants to monitor me another hour." I called the hospital's main number and asked to be connected to the infusion center. A receptionist answered, and I gave Stephanie's full name and date of birth. The woman paused, then said she could not disclose patient information. I told her I understood and asked whether I could leave a message for my wife. There was another pause. "Sir, I'm not finding anyone by that name in today's schedule." My throat tightened. Maybe she's listed under Stephanie Carter? Her maiden name? I asked. The receptionist checked again. "I'm sorry. I still don't see her." I thanked her, ended the call, and sat gripping the steering wheel until my fingertips hurt. At 7:20, a location-sharing app Stephanie had forgotten we still used showed her phone moving west through Manhattan, not away from the hospital, but toward the Hudson River. I followed from a distance. Her location stopped outside a boutique hotel in Chelsea. 15 minutes later, Stephanie emerged through the glass doors wearing fitted black pants, high-heeled boots, and a camel coat I had never seen. Her hair, which she claimed had begun thinning from chemotherapy, was styled in smooth waves. She was laughing. Not the strained laugh she performed for me when I tried to cheer her up. This laugh came from her whole body. A dark-haired man around 40 stepped outside behind her and placed his hand against the small of her back. Stephanie turned, kissed him on the mouth, and held the kiss long enough that I had time to understand exactly what I was seeing. The man fastened the diamond bracelet around her wrist. She lifted her arm beneath the hotel lights and admired it. Something cold moved from my stomach into my chest. My first instinct was to open the truck door. I pictured myself crossing the street, grabbing the man by his coat, demanding Stephanie explain the photograph, the medical bills, the nights I held her while she pretended to tremble. My body was ready before my mind was. Then I remembered the joint account. $218,000. That money represented nearly 9 years of work, including what I had saved before our marriage. We had planned to use it as a down payment on a house outside the city. Over the previous 11 months, Stephanie had convinced me to move almost all of it into one account because, according to her, estate planning would be easier if her condition became terminal. I stayed in the truck. That choice probably saved me. If I had confronted her outside that hotel, she would have known I was onto her, and by sunrise, every account we shared might have been empty. Instead, I took photographs through the windshield. Stephanie kissing the man. His hand on her waist. The bracelet on her wrist. The hotel entrance behind them. Then I watched them climb into a black Range Rover and disappear into traffic. I drove home by a different route, pulled over beneath the elevated tracks in Long Island City, opened my door, and vomited beside the curb. My hands would not stop shaking. I had spent almost a year preparing to become a widower. I had lain awake imagining an empty side of the bed, a funeral, and the moment I would have to call her parents. I had even begun recording voice messages for her because she said she wanted to hear me when she was too sick to talk. But she was not dying. She had been using the possibility of death to turn me into an obedient source of money. And the physical betrayal, brutal as it was, somehow felt secondary. The hotel kiss destroyed my marriage. The fake cancer reached backward and contaminated every act of love I had given her. I arrived home shortly before 9. Stephanie came in at 9:30 carrying the treatment bag she must have returned to collect while I was gone. She moved slowly across the living room, one hand pressed to her abdomen. Today was awful, she whispered. I kept throwing up. She was wearing the navy scarf now. The bracelet was gone. Do you need the emergency room? I asked. No. I just need you. She leaned against my chest, and I wrapped my arms around her because I needed her to believe the performance still worked. Her perfume carried the same expensive, smoky scent I had noticed when she left the hotel. They changed the dosage, she said. Dr. Feldman thinks the tumor may be resisting treatment. She began to cry against my shirt. I looked over her shoulder at our wedding photograph and felt something inside me become frighteningly calm. Whatever it takes, I said. We'll get through it. She held me tighter. I don't deserve you. That was the only honest sentence she gave me that night. While Stephanie slept, I photographed every page in her treatment folder. I copied the file names from our home computer, checked our bank balances, and changed the password to my personal email. At 2 a.m, I found the first unmistakable financial wound. 3 months earlier, $42,000 had been transferred from our joint savings account to a company called Meridian Patient Advocacy LLC. Stephanie had told me Meridian negotiated experimental treatment access. I searched the New York Business Registry. Meridian had been formed 7 months earlier. Its registered organizer was a woman named Lauren Pierce, Stephanie's older sister. Lauren was 34, lived in New Jersey, and worked as an office manager for a private medical practice. She had attended dinners at our apartment, asked Stephanie concerned questions about her nausea, and once hugged me in our hallway while telling me I was the kind of husband every woman deserved. She knew. At least, the company suggested she knew, but I refused to jump ahead of the evidence. Over the next 2 days, I behaved exactly as I always had. I woke Stephanie gently. I made her oatmeal. I asked whether she needed me to pick up medication. Then I went to work, closed the door of the temporary site office, and called a divorce attorney named Rebecca Sloan whose number I got from a subcontractor who had survived his own ugly separation. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do not move large sums impulsively. Do not threaten her. Do not access accounts that are only in her name. Preserve everything legally, and assume every conversation may eventually be read aloud in court." Can I protect what's left? I asked. Yes, but we do it correctly. First, I need statements, tax returns, property records, and copies of whatever medical documents she gave you. Second, you need a forensic accountant. Third, if she created fake invoices to obtain money, this may extend beyond divorce. The forensic accountant was a compact, silver-haired man named Malcolm Reed who spoke about money the way my best crane operator spoke about weight distribution, nothing dramatic, just pressure, leverage, and where failure would occur. He traced the $42,000 transfer from Meridian to a business account controlled by Lauren, then into 3 destinations, $18,000 toward Stephanie's hidden American Express balance, $12,000 to a luxury travel agency, and $10,000 as a deposit on the Chelsea Hotel's long-term suite package. The remaining $2,000 had been withdrawn in cash. That was only one payment. Malcolm found $96,700 in transfers disguised as medical costs, oncology consultations, genetic testing, and specialty prescriptions. There was a $31,000 personal loan opened using my income information and electronic signature. There were 2 credit cards I had never seen with combined balances above $47,000. There was even a crowdfunding page Lauren had created, complete with a photograph of Stephanie wrapped in a blanket beneath the title, "Help Steph Beat Ovarian Cancer." My co-workers, Stephanie's former colleagues, neighbors, and relatives had donated more than $63,000. I had personally shared that page with everyone I knew. Let me pause here, because this was the point when humiliation tried to become stronger than anger. It wasn't only that my wife had tricked me. She had turned my love into advertising material. Every time I had stood on a construction floor telling the guys, "She's hanging in there," I had unknowingly helped sell her lie. Every casserole left outside our apartment, every envelope of cash, every prayer from somebody's mother, Stephanie and Lauren had converted all of it into hotel stays, designer clothes, and debt payments. But shame belongs to the person who builds the lie, not the person whose trust was exploited. It took me months to truly believe that. At the time, I still felt branded by it. Malcolm and Rebecca helped me move half of the remaining joint funds into a protected account while leaving a clear paper trail. We froze the home equity application Stephanie had started without telling me, notified the bank of suspected identity fraud regarding the personal loan, and placed an alert on my credit reports. Rebecca prepared the divorce filing but held it back while we gathered stronger evidence. I installed no spyware and broke no passwords. I simply collected what I was legally entitled to see: joint bank statements, mail addressed to both of us, documents Stephanie left in shared spaces, and conversations in which I participated. The hardest part was the mask. Stephanie became more affectionate as the imaginary disease grew worse. She would rest her head in my lap and ask what I would do if she died. Once, she said, "Promise me you won't let money turn you bitter." "It's only money." I almost laughed. Instead, I brushed her hair away from her forehead and said, "I'm just glad I still have you." She must have taken my restraint for stupidity. 3 weeks after the hotel, she told me a specialist had recommended an out-of-network procedure costing $74,000 upfront. "It could give us more time," she said, sliding a printed estimate across the table. The document carried another fake medical logo. Lauren's company appeared in the payment instructions. "How much more time?" I asked. Stephanie looked down and made her lower lip tremble. "Maybe years. Then we'll find the money." Relief flashed across her face before she replaced it with gratitude. I photographed the estimate and sent it to Rebecca. That attempted payment changed the legal landscape. This was no longer just money already lost during a marriage. It was a fresh, documented effort to obtain another $74,000 through a fabricated terminal illness. Rebecca put me in contact with a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit and an attorney representing several donors from the crowdfunding campaign. We agreed that the cleanest approach was to let Stephanie confirm the lie in her own words without provoking an illegal setup. So one Friday evening, I sat across from her at our kitchen table and told her the bank needed more documentation before releasing the money. My phone rested openly beside me, recording a conversation I was part of, which was legal in New York. "They want the pathology report and a letter directly from Dr. Feldman," I said. Stephanie's fingers tightened around her tea. "That's ridiculous. I already gave them everything. The bank says the documents must come from the hospital." "Owen, I'm exhausted. I can't fight bureaucracy while I'm fighting cancer. I'll call the doctor myself." "No." The word came out too quickly. She softened her voice. "I mean, the clinic is overwhelmed. Lauren knows how to process it. Just send Meridian the deposit, and she'll handle the rest." "You trust Lauren with $74,000? "With my life," Stephanie said. "She's been helping from the beginning." There it was. Not proof of every detail, but confirmation that Lauren was not an innocent name attached to a shell company. The next morning, Lauren called me. Her voice carried the practiced patience of somebody pretending to explain something to a child. "Steph told me the bank is giving you trouble. We can't delay this, Owen. Her window may close." "What window?" I asked. "The treatment window." "Which treatment?" Silence lasted just a fraction too long. "The targeted one her oncologist discussed." "Does it have a name?" Lauren became irritated. "Why are you interrogating me when your wife is dying?" I looked through the site office window at workers pouring concrete 30 floors above Manhattan and said, "Because I'm responsible for the money." Then act responsible and save her. When the call ended, I sent the recording to Rebecca. Malcolm's investigation uncovered the identity of the man from the hotel 3 days later. His name was Daniel Cross, 41, a married regional director at Stephanie's former hospitality company. His wife, Marissa, lived with their 2 children in Westchester. Daniel had approved Stephanie's so-called medical leave and continued paying her as an independent consultant through a vendor account. In return, company funds covered some of their dinners and trips. Stephanie had not simply taken my money. She and Daniel appeared to be billing parts of their relationship to his employer while Lauren washed other expenses through Meridian. The fraud had branches now. More importantly, Daniel's messages, recovered from invoices and travel confirmations sent to an email account Stephanie had left logged into our shared laptop, showed that he knew about the fake diagnosis. In one exchange, Stephanie wrote, "Owen thinks the second-line chemo failed. He'll approve the 74." Daniel replied, "Make it convincing. After the transfer, we can finally start planning Miami." Lauren answered in the same thread, "Both of you need to stop putting details in writing." I read those messages in Rebecca's office. My hands went numb, but I did not cry. Not then. Stephanie had intended to take the money and leave. She was not maintaining the lie indefinitely. The fake procedure was the final extraction. Once the transfer cleared, she planned to tell me the cancer had returned aggressively, spend several weeks at Lauren's house under the excuse of receiving specialized care, and then disappear with Daniel. They had discussed how long she should wait before filing for divorce so it would not look suspicious. Daniel suggested 6 months. Stephanie wrote, "He'll be too relieved I survived to fight over money." If you have ever wondered whether discovering one more fact can hurt after you already know the worst, the answer is yes. There is always a lower floor. Finding out that Stephanie had faked cancer broke my heart. Learning that she had scheduled my relief as another stage in the scam broke something else, the part of me that still wanted to believe our marriage had once been real. I stopped thinking about confrontation after that. I started thinking about distribution. Every person who had donated deserved the records. Daniel's wife deserved the hotel photographs and messages. His employer deserved the expense reports. Our families deserved to know what their sympathy had financed. The bank deserved the forged forms. The hospital deserved to know its name and logo had been used. Stephanie believed she was days away from receiving $74,000. What she did not know was that Rebecca had scheduled the divorce filing, the bank's fraud department had completed its preliminary review, Daniel's company had begun a confidential audit, and 2 detectives had already interviewed the owner of the print shop where Lauren ordered the counterfeit medical packets. I did not want a dramatic speech. I wanted every door to close at once. The date we chose was March 14th, the anniversary of the day Stephanie claimed she had received her diagnosis. Lauren had organized a private, one-year survivor dinner at an event space in Midtown. Nearly 80 people had been invited, including relatives, friends, co-workers, and several major donors. Stephanie planned to announce that she needed one last life-saving procedure. She thought the dinner would pressure me into presenting the money publicly. Instead, I spent the night before it building an email package with 12 attachments, authentic bank statements, false medical bills, corporate registration records, travel receipts, hotel photographs, recorded admissions, the crowdfunding ledger, the Miami messages, and a concise timeline prepared by Rebecca's office. At the top of the message, I wrote, "Stephanie does not have cancer. She never did." I scheduled separate versions for the donors, our families, Daniel's wife, his company's board, the crowdfunding platform, the hospital's legal department, and everyone attending the dinner. Each recipient would get only the evidence they were legally entitled to receive. No medical speculation. No insults. No threats. Facts carried more weight than rage ever could. At 6:30 the following evening, Stephanie stood beneath a wall of white flowers in a silver dress, smiling at people who believed they were celebrating her survival. Lauren moved through the room with a tablet, quietly collecting new pledges. Daniel was not officially attending, but Marissa had received my message that morning, along with an invitation and enough evidence to understand why she needed to come. I entered wearing the navy suit Stephanie had chosen for me. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Did the bank release it?" "Everything is ready," I said. At 7:15, Lauren tapped a glass and asked everyone to gather near the stage. Stephanie took the microphone. She thanked her family, praised Lauren for being her medical warrior, and called me the man who had sacrificed everything to keep her alive. People applauded. I watched tears appear in Stephanie's eyes on command. Then she turned toward me and extended her hand. "Owen has one more piece of good news to share." My phone showed 7:19 p.m. The emails were scheduled for 7:20. I walked onto the stage, took the microphone, and looked across the room at people who had cooked for us, prayed for us, covered my shifts, and opened their wallets because they trusted my wife's suffering. Stephanie smiled beside me. Lauren stood near the back, still holding the tablet. The minute changed. Phones began vibrating throughout the room. One after another. On tables. Inside handbags. In suit pockets. Stephanie's smile remained in place for approximately 5 seconds, until Lauren looked down at her screen and all the color drained from her face. I raised the microphone and said, "Before anyone gives another $1, you should read the email I just sent you." For several seconds, nobody moved. The room was still filled with soft piano music and the warm amber glow of rented candles, but all I could hear was the scattered buzzing of phones and the sharp little sounds people made as they opened the attachments. Stephanie turned toward me with the microphone still near her chest. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I gave everyone the truth." Lauren started pushing through the crowd toward the stage. "Turn off the projector," she called to the event coordinator. "This is private family business." That was interesting, because I had not asked anyone to turn on the projector. The screen behind us was still showing photographs from Stephanie's imaginary year of treatment, Stephanie beneath a blanket, Stephanie holding a hospital cup, Stephanie smiling bravely with a scarf wrapped around her hair. Lauren's panic told me she expected something even worse. A man near the front stood up. His name was Victor, one of my electricians, and he had organized a collection at work that raised almost $9,000. "Are you saying she was never sick?" he asked. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. Stephanie grabbed my arm. "Owen, stop. You're having some kind of breakdown. Then explain why Memorial Sloan Kettering has no record of treating you." Her grip loosened. "They can't release my information. They released it to your attorney after you signed the authorization Rebecca sent you last week. That was one of the traps we had set. Rebecca's office had mailed Stephanie what looked like a routine insurance authorization connected to the $74,000 payment. Stephanie signed it without reading carefully because she believed it would help release the money. The authorization allowed our legal team to request confirmation of the supposed treatment records directly from the institutions named on her invoices. Every hospital responded that no such treatment had occurred. Stephanie stared at me, searching for another exit. "I went through a private clinic," she said. "Not everything is in the hospital system." A murmur moved across the room. I nodded toward the screen. The event coordinator, who had received my email too, connected her laptop and opened the timeline. The photographs disappeared. In their place appeared the first counterfeit invoice, followed by the business registration for Meridian Patient Advocacy LLC. Lauren stopped walking. "That company belongs to Lauren," I said. $96,700 from our joint savings went through it. More than $63,000 came from the crowdfunding campaign. Some of that money paid Stephanie's hidden credit card balances. Some paid for designer clothing. Some paid for hotel rooms and vacations with Daniel Cross. "That's a lie," Lauren snapped. "Those are legitimate patient services." A woman beside her turned the tablet around. The screen displayed a transfer from Meridian to a luxury travel agency. Was the Four Seasons in Palm Beach a patient service? She asked. Lauren's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Stephanie reached for the microphone I was holding, and I stepped back. You don't understand, she said to the room. Owen has been controlling our money for years. He watches everything I spend. I was trying to create something of my own because I had no freedom. It was such a desperate rewrite of reality that it almost impressed me. I had paid every bill, added her as an equal owner of our accounts, supported her career, and handed over nearly every extra dollar because I believed she needed treatment. Now she wanted the same people she had defrauded to see her as financially imprisoned. Page 17, I said. Phones shifted in people's hands. That's the message where Stephanie tells Daniel I believe her second round of chemotherapy failed. Page 18 is Daniel telling her to make the next request convincing. Page 19 is their plan to move to Miami after I transfer another $74,000. Stephanie looked toward the exits. Her mother, Diane, was standing near the flower wall with one hand over her mouth. Her father had lowered himself into a chair. They had refinanced a small property in Pennsylvania and given Stephanie $25,000 for specialized genetic therapy. Diane said her daughter's name once, quietly, like she was checking whether the woman on stage was still the same person she had raised. Mom, please, Stephanie said. Those messages are out of context. What context makes this acceptable? Diane asked. Stephanie could not answer. Then the doors opened, and Marissa Cross entered. She wore a dark red coat and carried a thick envelope beneath one arm. Daniel followed several steps behind her, arguing in a low voice with a man I recognized as his company's general counsel. 2 corporate security officers came in after them. I had expected Marissa. I had not expected Daniel, but I later learned that she had told him they were attending an urgent company dinner. She wanted him to walk into the truth without time to prepare a lie. The instant Stephanie saw him, whatever remained of her performance collapsed. Daniel, she said. Marissa looked at the diamond bracelet on Stephanie's wrist. She was wearing it openly now, probably because she thought the survivor dinner was her final performance before taking the money. That belonged to my grandmother, Marissa said. The room went so quiet that the ventilation system sounded loud. Daniel turned toward Stephanie, then toward me, his face tightening as he realized there were witnesses everywhere. Marissa, let's leave, he said. No, she replied. I've spent 11 months being told you were traveling for work while you slept with a woman pretending to have cancer. I'm exactly where I need to be. Stephanie covered the bracelet with her opposite hand. Daniel told me it was his. Daniel tells people whatever makes stealing from them convenient. Marissa handed the envelope to the corporate attorney. Inside were printed messages, credit card statements, and photographs she had found after receiving my evidence. Daniel had used company expense accounts to cover at least $38,000 in hotel stays, meals, transportation, and gifts. His employer had already suspended his access to corporate systems that afternoon, but they wanted him present when he was formally notified. The general counsel asked Daniel to step into the hallway. I'm not discussing employment matters here, Daniel said. You're not being asked to discuss them, the attorney replied. You're being informed that your employment has been terminated effective immediately. You'll receive further correspondence regarding the company's recovery claims. Daniel looked at Stephanie as if she had personally summoned the disaster. You said he had no idea, he muttered. You said the paperwork was clean. She flinched. Don't blame me. You approved the expenses. Because you said Lauren knew how to hide them. Lauren backed toward the side exit. 2 detectives were waiting in the hallway. They did not burst through the doors or put anyone in handcuffs on stage. Real investigations are rarely as theatrical as people imagine. They approached Lauren, identified themselves, and asked whether she would speak with them voluntarily. Lauren refused and called an attorney. That was her right. But the sight of those detectives destroyed the last version of the story, in which this was merely a bitter husband humiliating his wife. People began confronting Stephanie from every direction. A former co-worker wanted to know where her $5,000 donation had gone. My supervisor asked whether she understood that some of our laborers had donated entire weekly paychecks. Her aunt demanded an explanation for the fake photographs. One of our neighbors began crying because her own sister had died of ovarian cancer 6 years earlier. "I sat with you and told you what the final days were like," she said. "You held my hands and pretended you were afraid of the same thing." Stephanie stepped away from her as though the grief itself might stain her dress. Let me pause here, because public exposure sounds satisfying when you imagine it from a distance. It was satisfying to stop the fraud. It was satisfying to watch the lie lose oxygen. But standing there, surrounded by real people discovering that their compassion had been exploited, I did not feel powerful. I felt responsible for ending something poisonous. Those are not the same feeling. Revenge wants suffering for its own sake. Accountability wants the harm to stop and the truth to reach everyone who must make an informed decision. That distinction mattered later, especially when Stephanie's lawyer tried to portray my actions as vindictive. Stephanie finally turned back to me. "You could have talked to me privately. Would you have returned the money? We could have worked something out. You were going to take another $74,000 and disappear." I wasn't thinking clearly. For 11 months. She lowered her voice. "Owen, please. We can go home and talk. I'll explain everything. You can explain it to Rebecca." I handed her a sealed envelope. She looked down at it. "What is this?" "Divorce papers." The expression that crossed her face was not heartbreak. It was calculation. Her eyes moved from the envelope to me, then toward the people reading the evidence, as if she were inventorying what could still be saved. "You can't leave me with nothing," she said. "I'm not leaving you with nothing. I'm asking the court to determine what you owe." I walked off the stage. Behind me, Stephanie began calling my name, first softly, then angrily. I did not turn around. Within 48 hours, the crowdfunding platform froze the remaining balance and began contacting donors. Our bank formally classified the personal loan as suspected identity theft after a document examiner found that my electronic signature had been copied from an earlier mortgage application. The fake medical vendors were flagged. The state attorney general's office requested records from Meridian, and Lauren's medical practice employer suspended her after discovering that she had accessed blank letterhead and copied physician credentials used on several forged documents. The legal process lasted much longer than the public collapse. There were hearings, depositions, document requests, and months when every envelope in my mailbox made my shoulders tense. Stephanie initially claimed she genuinely believed she had cancer because of a misunderstanding with a doctor. That argument fell apart when investigators recovered earlier messages between her and Lauren discussing which cancer would be serious enough to justify the money but survivable enough that nobody expects a funeral. Stephanie then claimed Daniel manipulated her. Daniel claimed Stephanie created the scheme before their affair began. Lauren claimed she thought Meridian was only helping Stephanie conceal personal spending from a controlling husband. Their stories could not coexist, and each new attempt to protect themselves created evidence against the others. The divorce court did not award me every dollar I requested. Courts are not magical refund machines. Some of the money was gone permanently. But the judge credited the documented dissipation of marital assets against Stephanie's share of what remained. She received no spousal support. I kept my retirement account, my truck, and almost all the protected savings. Stephanie became responsible for the hidden credit cards in her name, while the forged personal loan was removed from my credit after the bank's investigation. In a separate civil settlement involving donors, she and Lauren agreed to a restitution schedule. Daniel's former employer sued him for the misused corporate funds, and Marissa filed for divorce. The criminal case resulted in Stephanie pleading guilty to fraud-related charges in exchange for cooperation and restitution, while Lauren faced professional consequences and a separate plea tied to forged documentation and the crowdfunding operation. Stephanie avoided the longest possible sentence, but she did not avoid a conviction. She spent several months in county custody, followed by probation and strict financial monitoring. More damaging to the life she wanted, every version of her future now required an explanation. Daniel abandoned her before the plea hearing. He had promised her Miami, but the moment his marriage, career, and money disappeared, he treated her like a defective investment. In one of their final recovered messages, he wrote, "I never agreed to go down for this. You were supposed to handle Owen." Stephanie replied 11 times. He did not answer. People sometimes asked whether watching Daniel reject her gave me closure. It did not. Closure came from accepting that none of them had been capable of giving me an explanation that would restore meaning to what happened. Their betrayal was not a puzzle I needed to solve forever. It was information about who they were. 2 years after the divorce, I used the money I had protected and a performance bonus from work to start a small construction management company with Victor. We specialized in apartment renovations and small commercial projects that larger firms ignored. Our first office was a narrow room above an auto parts store in Astoria. The radiator clanged, the windows leaked cold air, and the conference table was a door laid across 2 filing cabinets. I loved it. Every contract we won felt clean because nobody had to pretend to be sick for the numbers to make sense. By our 3rd year, we employed 14 people and moved into a proper office in Long Island City. I also began volunteering with a nonprofit that helped families verify and organize medical crowdfunding campaigns. I never told clients that trust was foolish. Most people asking for help were genuinely frightened and overwhelmed. I simply showed them how to keep transparent records, verify payment destinations, and protect donors without stripping dignity from the patient. It became my way of reclaiming the part of myself Stephanie had tried to make me ashamed of, the part willing to help. Her reputation followed her more effectively than any insult I could have invented. When she applied for jobs involving money, events, healthcare, or charitable fundraising, background checks exposed the conviction. When she tried joining new social circles, someone eventually found the old crowdfunding page or one of the local articles about the case. She moved twice, first to Connecticut and then to Western Pennsylvania, but distance could not create a version of her past that had never happened. I did not participate in online harassment, contact her employers, or interfere with her attempts to rebuild. I had released the evidence once, to the people directly affected. After that, the consequences belonged to her. 6 years after the survivor dinner, I saw Stephanie again by accident. I was leaving a supplier's showroom near Union Square when rain started coming down in heavy summer sheets. People crowded beneath the awning, and a woman beside me dropped a paper grocery bag. 2 oranges rolled across the wet sidewalk. I bent down, caught one against my shoe, and handed it back. "Thank you," she said. I recognized the voice before I truly recognized her face. Stephanie looked older than 36, though not ruined in the dramatic way people imagine villains should look. Her hair was shorter. Her coat was inexpensive and damp at the shoulders. There was a plain canvas bag hanging from her wrist where the diamond bracelet had once been. She stared at me and said, "Owen." "Hi, Stephanie." For years, I had imagined that meeting. In some versions, I delivered a perfect line. In others, she apologized, and I finally asked why. But standing there in the rain, I felt no heat in my chest, no desire to impress her, punish her, forgive her, or prove that I had won. She was simply somebody I used to know. "I heard about your company," she said. "You're doing well." "We are." She glanced toward the street. "I'm working at a small packaging warehouse outside Scranton. Inventory intake. Nothing involving accounts. The last sentence sounded rehearsed, as if she had learned to confess her limitations before anybody else could expose them. "I hope it works out," I said, and I meant it in the same distant way I might wish a stranger safe travel. She looked surprised. "Do you ever think about us?" "Not the way you mean." The rain softened. People began leaving the awning. Stephanie tightened her grip on the grocery bag. "I was sick, Owen. Not with cancer, obviously. But something was wrong with me. Maybe. I hope you figured out what." "I'm trying." I nodded once. "Take care of yourself." Then I crossed the street when the light changed. I did not look back. That was the moment I understood I had finally outlived what she did to me. Winning the divorce had protected my future. Exposing the fraud had protected other people. Building my company had restored my confidence. But indifference was the final freedom, because her life no longer had any power to define mine. Before I end this, I want to leave you with 4 things I learned, and I learned every one of them the expensive way. 1. Compassion should never require financial blindness. I could support Stephanie emotionally without transferring tens of thousands of dollars through a company I had never verified. Asking for original invoices and direct provider confirmation is not cruelty, it is basic protection. 2. When the truth threatens your entire financial life, control your first reaction. If I had confronted Stephanie outside that Chelsea hotel, she could have emptied our accounts and destroyed evidence before morning. The photographs mattered, but my restraint mattered more. 3. Evidence should go to the people who have a legitimate reason to receive it. I exposed Stephanie to donors, relatives, institutions, and spouses who had been directly harmed. I did not spend years chasing her from job to job. Accountability ended the deception, obsession would only have kept me tied to her. 4. Being deceived does not make you stupid. Stephanie exploited loyalty, fear, and love, the qualities a marriage is supposed to make safe. My mistake was not caring about my wife. My mistake was believing that love and verification could not exist together. So tell me honestly, if you had been standing in my place, would you have confronted Stephanie at the hotel, exposed everything at the survivor dinner, or handled it quietly through lawyers? Comment 1 for immediate confrontation, 2 for the public and legal strike I chose, or 3 for a completely private approach. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always like seeing how far these stories travel. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and come back for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional patterns, fully rewritten in New York City to create original content. Any resemblance to actual people or events is entirely coincidental.